Imagine you are driving down the interstate right now.
Okay.
You are doing, maybe 70 miles an hour. Your family is in the car, and you pull up alongside a massive 80,000-pound semi-truck.
Right. Happens every day.
Exactly. You are separated by maybe 3 feet of empty space. Now, what if I told you that the federal government official safety and drug testing program is potentially missing up to 93% of the heavy drug users applying to drive those massive rigs?
It's terrifying.
And what if I told you that the companies actually trying to keep those dangerous drivers off the road are being financially punished for it?
It sounds completely backwards, but it is exactly what's happening.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a completely paradoxical moment in the global supply chain, specifically through the lens of Knight-Swift Transportation and their first quarter 2026 earnings call.
It really is a staggering statistic about the drug testing. And I mean, it sits right at the heart of an industry that is currently undergoing a massive, painful, but ultimately necessary transformation.
Yeah.
When we look at Knight-Swift, we aren't just analyzing a single business. We are looking at the foundational circulatory system of the entire physical economy.
Absolutely. Knight-Swift is a bellwether. I mean, if you aren't deeply embedded in the freight and logistics world, you might wonder why a trucking company's quarterly financial report even matters to you.
Right. Why care about a trucking stock?
Exactly. But they are one of the largest players in North America, and their operations touch absolutely everything we consume. So just to set the stage, they operate across 4 massive distinct segments.
Yeah, let's break those down.
So first, you have their truckload division, which is what most people picture, the standard big rigs hauling a single, fully loaded 53-foot trailer from one facility to another.
The classic over-the-road trucker.
Yep. Then you have LTL, or less than truckload. And that is a completely different operational beast. It involves these highly complex regional and national networks.
Right, it's hub and spoke logistics.
Precisely. They are taking smaller, maybe pallet-sized shipments from dozens of different customers, consolidating them at a local terminal, moving them across the country, and breaking them down again for local delivery.
And then beyond the physical trucks, they also have their logistics segment.
Which is basically a brokerage, right?
Exactly. It acts as a brokerage. In that space, they don't even use their own trucks. They act as the middleman, connecting companies that need to ship goods with tens of thousands of third-party independent carriers.
Wow. Okay.
And finally, their intermodal division, which coordinates the movement of those massive steel shipping containers between freight trains and trucks for, the final mile of delivery.
So they are everywhere.
Everywhere. Because they touch all 4 of these modes, their data tells us exactly what factories are producing, what retailers are stocking, and how efficiently the entire American commercial engine is running.
And right now, the data from their Q1 2026 report is telling a story that defies traditional financial logic.
It really does.
We are decoding a situation where this massive freight giant posted a GAAP financial loss for the quarter. I mean, their operating income took a severe hit.
The huge hit.
And yet, if you listen to their executive team, specifically their CEO, Adam Miller, they sound more optimistic and bullish on the future than they have in over 4 years.
Yeah, they sound thrilled.
So our mission today is to understand how a company can stand in the middle of a brutal financial quarter, look at the rubble around them, and declare that a golden age is about to begin.
It's quite the pivot.
We're going to explore the hidden regulatory shifts, the aggressive safety crackdowns, and a fundamental purging of bad actors from the highway that is signaling a massive inflection point in the cost of moving goods.
I think it's the ultimate divergence between trailing financial indicators and leading market indicators.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the trailing indicators, which measure the reality of the last 90 days, they look genuinely painful.
Brutal, even.
Brutal. But the leading indicators, the data points that predict what the market will look like 6, 12, or 18 months from now, they are pointing to a structural shift in capacity that we just haven't seen in modern freight history.
Wow.
To understand the optimism, we have to pull apart the negative numbers and see what is actually hiding underneath them.
Let's start right there with the bad numbers, because on paper, they are ugly.
Very ugly.
For the first quarter of 2026, Knight-Swift reported a GAAP earnings loss of 1 cent per share.
Right.
Now, GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. It's the standardized way companies have to report their bottom line to the government and investors. A year ago, they were positive 19 cents a share.
That is a massive swing.
A huge swing. Their adjusted earnings per share dropped from 28 cents down to 9 cents. If you exclude the fuel surcharges that fluctuate with the cost of diesel, their overall consolidated revenue was basically flat.
Yeah.
And the metric that really stands out is their adjusted operating income, which declined by $37 million compared to the same quarter last year.
Yeah. I mean, a $37 million drop in operating income, that is a heavy blow.
Definitely.
It represents a severe degradation in the actual profitability of their core operations during that 3-month window. When a company of this scale posts a GAAP loss, it means that under the strictest accounting rules, they literally bled cash. The expenses outweigh the revenue.
So knowing that, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
The CEO opens this call and explicitly states that there are more reasons to be optimistic about the industry than they have seen in over 4 years.
Right.
If I'm an investor or just a casual observer, I'm looking at a net loss and a tanking operating income. My immediate reaction is that this is just corporate spin.
Like they're just making excuses.
Exactly. When the numbers are bad, management teams often point to some vague, bright future to keep everyone from panicking and selling their stock. How is a net loss a cause for a victory lap?
It's the most logical question to ask. If you only look at the top-line summary, it absolutely sounds like a management team trying to distract you from a burning building.
Right. Look over there, not at the fire.
Yeah, exactly. But the key to understanding this market is separating the macro environment from highly specific, localized events.
Okay.
The first quarter of 2026 for Knight-Swift was bombarded by a series of massive, isolated anomalies. In financial analysis, we call these one-offs.
One-offs.
Right. They are massive expenses that hit the ledger in a specific quarter, but have absolutely nothing to do with the underlying day-to-day health of the business going forward.
The details on these one-offs are fascinating because they reveal the physical vulnerabilities of moving freight.
They really do.
The biggest operational hit they took was an estimated $12 to $14 million net negative impact from severe winter weather in January, combined with sharply rising fuel prices.
Yeah.
Now, bad weather sounds like the ultimate generic excuse. Everyone deals with weather.
Right. It's winter, it snows.
Exactly. But in the logistics world, a massive winter freeze isn't just an inconvenience, right? It's a compounding financial nightmare.
The mechanics of winter weather in trucking are brutal. When a severe winter storm blankets a region, and in this case, it heavily impacted the southeast United States, which is a massive density hub for Knight-Swift's LTL network.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the entire system just paralyzes. First and foremost, the trucks literally cannot move at safe highway speeds, or the roads are entirely shut down.
Right.
So immediately your asset utilization drops to near zero. You have thousands of trucks that are supposed to be generating hundreds of dollars a day in revenue doing absolutely nothing.
But the expenses don't stop just because the truck stops moving, right?
That's the compounding factor. You still have to pay your drivers who are stranded at truck stops or distribution centers. You are still absorbing the daily depreciation of the tractor and the trailer.
Makes sense.
But the most punishing element is the fuel burn.
Really? The fuel burn?
Oh, absolutely. In sub-freezing temperatures, a diesel truck cannot simply be turned off. Diesel fuel can actually gel and freeze in the lines if the temperature drops low enough.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. Plus, you have a driver living in the sleeper berth of that cab who needs heat to survive. So thousands of trucks sit idle, with their engines running or their auxiliary power units blasting, burning roughly a gallon of diesel fuel every hour.
And during the specific freeze in January, the price of diesel was actively spiking.
Precisely. So you are burning increasingly expensive fuel by the thousands of gallons across the fleet to move 0 miles and generate 0 revenue.
Ouch.
You are quite literally setting cash on fire just to keep the equipment from freezing and your drivers safe. That $12 to $14 million hit wasn't because Knight-Swift suddenly forgot how to route trucks efficiently. It was an act of nature that mathematically destroyed the margins for a few very specific weeks.
That paints a stark picture of the physical reality of the business. But the weather was actually only a piece of the puzzle.
Right, just one piece.
The largest single financial anchor dragging down the quarter was an $18 million expense hitting their LTL segment. And this expense had absolutely nothing to do with trucks on the road in 2026.
Nothing at all.
It was primarily related to an adverse arbitration ruling on a legal claim that originated way back in 2022.
This is a perfect example of how liability creates a long, invisible tail in the transportation industry.
A long tail.
Yeah, I mean, when you operate tens of thousands of heavy vehicles, incidents are going to happen. There will be accidents, cargo losses, or property damage.
Sure, just by the law of averages.
Exactly. But the financial resolution of those incidents rarely happens in the same quarter or even the same year that the event occurred.
Because it immediately goes into the legal system. It goes to insurance adjusters, then to lawyers, then potentially to court or arbitration.
Exactly. Companies set aside financial reserves money they expect to pay out eventually, based on historical averages. But sometimes a case goes to an arbitration panel, and the panel hands down a ruling that far exceeds those reserves.
Oh, I see.
So here we have a situation from 4 years ago, completely disconnected from the current safety profile or operational efficiency of the 2026 fleet. The ruling comes down in Q1, and under accounting rules, Knight-Swift has to instantly recognize that massive $18 million shortfall on today's books.
That is wild.
It creates a massive distortion. It makes the current LTL operation look wildly unprofitable, when in reality, they're just paying off a 4-year-old legal ghost.
It's like checking your monthly budget, feeling good because you've cut your grocery and entertainment spending, and then suddenly getting hit with a massive medical bill from a surgery you had 4 years ago.
That's a perfect analogy.
Your bank account drains. You are technically operating at a loss for the month, but your actual daily spending habits are still incredibly disciplined.
Right. The current habits are fine.
And just to add insult to injury, they had one more bizarre localized expense. A $4 million hit in their truckload segment due to an adverse decision regarding value-added tax, or VAT, reimbursement down in Mexico for prior tax years.
Cross-border freight is an incredibly lucrative but wildly complex arena.
I can imagine.
Moving freight in and out of Mexico involves navigating different legal jurisdictions, tariff structures, and tax codes. Often, carriers pay taxes up front with the legal expectation of being reimbursed by the foreign government later.
Okay, so it's a cash flow thing.
Yeah. But Knight-Swift expected a specific reimbursement for historical operations. The Mexican tax authority or court ruled against them, and suddenly they have to write down a $4 million loss. Again, this is a ghost from the past. It tells us nothing about how efficiently a Knight-Swift truck is moving from Monterey to Dallas today.
So let's do the math on these ghosts and anomalies. You have roughly $13 million vaporized by the winter freeze.
Yep.
You have $18 million instantly wiped out by a 2022 legal arbitration.
Correct.
And you have $4 million lost to a historical Mexican tax dispute. That is roughly $35 million in highly specific, non-recurring, or backward-looking expenses.
It's a huge number.
And if we look back at the top-line numbers, their adjusted operating income for the entire quarter declined by $37 million year over year.
That is the revelation hidden in the balance sheet right there.
Yeah.
When you synthesize those numbers, you realize that if you strip away the snowstorms, the 4-year-old lawsuit, and the foreign tax dispute, the core underlying machine of Knight-Swift, the actual day-to-day operation of moving freight across North America, was essentially flat.
Flat.
And maintaining a flat operational margin in what has been universally described as the most brutal, unforgiving freight recession in modern history is actually a massive victory.
Which perfectly explains why management isn't panicking about a gap loss.
Right. They aren't worried.
They are ignoring the noise of the one-offs. They are looking at the underlying engine, and they are realizing that the engine isn't just surviving, it's actively preparing to rev up.
Exactly.
But that leads us to the biggest question of this entire deep dive. Why is the market suddenly turning in their favor? We've been in a freight recession for 3 years. The one-way truckload market has been an absolute bloodbath.
A total bloodbath.
During the pandemic, consumer spending exploded, freight rates skyrocketed to historic highs, and it created a gold rush. Anyone who could secure a loan bought a truck and became an owner-operator.
Everyone wanted to be a trucker.
Right. The market was flooded with excess capacity. So naturally, when the pandemic boom ended, there were too many trucks chasing too little freight, and rates crashed.
The classic bubble burst.
But now, that excess capacity is finally bleeding out of the market. Trucks are leaving the road. But the CEO pointed out something fascinating. They aren't just leaving because they are going bankrupt from low rates. They are being forcefully purged.
And this is the dynamic that makes this specific moment in trucking history so incredibly unique.
How so?
Well, historically, the freight market operates on a very predictable, pure free market cycle of boom and bust. Demand surges, rates go up, new trucks flood the market.
Standard supply and demand.
Right. Eventually, the supply of trucks overshoots the demand for freight, rates collapse, and the new thinly capitalized operators simply can't make their truck payments. They go bankrupt, their trucks get repossessed, capacity slowly bleeds out of the market, and the cycle resets. It is a cycle of economic starvation.
But economic starvation takes a long time. Guys will run their trucks into the ground, defer maintenance, and max out their credit cards just to stay afloat for one more month.
Exactly. It's a slow bleed. But this time, economic starvation is taking a back seat to a much more immediate and ruthless force, which is targeted government regulation.
The government is stepping in.
Yeah. We aren't just watching the invisible hand of the free market slowly choke out bad businesses. We're watching the very visible hand of the FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and the Department of Transportation step in and actively rip capacity out of the market.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this purge, because the tactics the government is using are fascinating.
They really are.
They are actively revoking invalidly issued, non-domiciled commercial driver's licenses. They are literally shutting down non-compliant CDL training schools. How did we get to a point where the government has to shut down driving schools?
It goes back to that pandemic gold rush we mentioned. When spot market rates were paying $3, $4, sometimes $5 a mile, the financial incentive to get a driver behind the wheel immediately was overwhelming.
Oh, I see.
That desperation created a dark sub-economy. You had fly-by-night CDL schools popping up, essentially operating as diploma mills.
Just printing licenses.
Basically, they were fast-tracking individuals who didn't meet basic residency requirements, who couldn't pass rigorous safety audits, and who were entirely unprepared to safely operate an 80,000-pound vehicle.
The CEO specifically noted that a lot of this excess capacity that flooded the market may not have been playing by the rules that we play by, and therefore operating with a different cost structure. He used a very specific, evocative term. He called them chameleon carriers.
Chameleon carriers, it's the perfect term.
Let's break down the anatomy of a chameleon carrier, because it highlights exactly why the industry has been so fundamentally broken for the last few years.
The chameleon carrier is the bane of legitimate trucking companies.
Okay.
Imagine a small trucking company, maybe running 5 to 10 trucks. They cut every conceivable corner to save money. They defer critical maintenance on their brakes and tires.
Which is terrifying.
It is. They force their drivers to run over their legal hours of service limits, manipulating their electronic logging devices to drive exhausted. Eventually, their safety scores get so incredibly bad that the FMCSA swoops in, conducts an audit, and legally shuts the company down for severe safety violations.
In a normal world, that business is dead. The owner faces the consequences, the trucks are sold off, and the bad actors are removed from the highway.
But in the world of the chameleon carrier, the owner simply closes the doors on Friday, goes online, files paperwork for a brand new DOT Department of Transportation number under a completely new corporate name.
Wait, really? Just a new name?
Yeah, maybe puts the business in their spouse's name, repaints the logos on the doors of the trucks, and opens back up on Monday morning. They change their colors to hide their past, just like a chameleon.
That's insane.
They shed all of their safety violations, all of their audit history, and they start with a clean slate, operating the exact same unsafe trucks with the exact same exhausted drivers.
And because they are dodging all the costs associated with actual safety, they aren't paying for rigorous mechanic inspections. They aren't paying for advanced driver training. They aren't investing in modern, safety-equipped trucks. Their operating costs are artificially, dangerously low.
Precisely. And because their costs are so low, they can go to shippers and bid on freight at rates that would instantly bankrupt a legitimate safe carrier like Knight-Swift.
So they are undercutting the good guys.
Completely distorting the entire pricing structure of the market. Shippers get addicted to these unsustainably low rates, ignoring the massive safety risks they're taking by putting their fight on these trucks.
But the administration is finally building a wall that the chameleons can't climb over.
Finally, yes.
They are pushing for strict enforcement of English language proficiency for drivers, which immediately sidelines a portion of the illegitimate workforce that was fast-tracked through those diploma mills. But the real kill shot is the insurance regulation.
Yes, the insurance mandate.
There is a massive push to enforce a $5 million minimum liability insurance requirement for carriers.
Which is huge.
If you are a chameleon carrier running a shoestring budget, deferring maintenance, and operating with a shadowy safety history, walking into an insurance broker and trying to secure a $5 million policy is going to be impossible.
Absolutely impossible.
The insurance companies will look at your actual risk profile and either deny you completely or quote you a premium that is so astronomically high it instantly destroys your business model. Insurance becomes the ultimate, unavoidable bouncer at the door.
That's exactly how it functions. This regulatory cleanup isn't just a broad, generic effort. It acts as a highly specific, massive filter.
A filter?
Yeah, it systematically targets and eliminates the lowest priced, least compliant capacity in the one-way truckload market. The exact segment of the market that Knight-Swift operates in, which was devastated by this influx of bad actors, is now poised to benefit the most as the government forcefully evicts them from the industry.
It makes me think of a massive, wildly overcrowded nightclub.
Okay, I like this.
For 3 years, during the boom, the doors were wide open. Anyone could walk in, regardless of whether they were of age, regardless of how they were acting. It was chaotic, crowded, and dangerous, and the people who actually wanted to be there and enjoy the music were getting trampled.
Sounds awful.
But suddenly, ownership changes. A new, massive bouncer steps to the front door, and he starts aggressively checking IDs. He's scanning them with black lights to catch the fakes. He's walking through the crowd and physically tossing out the people who are underage or causing trouble.
Right.
Suddenly, the nightclub isn't overcrowded anymore. There's a ton of room on the dance floor, and the people left inside are the ones who are actually supposed to be there, who followed the rules and paid the cover charge.
That is spot on.
And in this scenario, the biggest, most aggressive bouncer that Knight-Swift is desperately trying to get stationed at the door is the drug testing mandate. This is the detail from the call that is truly terrifying when you understand the mechanics of it. Let's talk about the hair follicle discrepancy.
The data Knight-Swift provided regarding hair follicle testing versus standard urinalysis is arguably the most staggering, consequential piece of information in this entire financial report.
It's wild.
It highlights a massive systemic failure in federal safety oversight.
So let's break down the mechanics of the testing. Knight-Swift, completely voluntarily and at their own considerable expense, has been using hair follicle drug testing on their driver applicants for over a decade.
Voluntarily?
Right. They don't have to do this. The federal standard, the absolute baseline required by the government to put a driver behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound missile, is a basic urinalysis.
And we have to understand why urinalysis is fundamentally flawed for an industry that requires absolute sobriety. A urine test primarily measures recent use. Yeah, depending on the substance, the detection window can be incredibly short. If an applicant knows they have a drug test coming up for a driving job, they simply stop using for a few days, drink massive amounts of water, or use specific detoxifying agents to flush their system, pass the test, and then immediately resume using once they are hired.
But a hair follicle test is a completely different biological mechanism.
It is. When your body metabolizes a drug, the chemical markers are deposited into your bloodstream, and those markers become embedded in the hair follicle as the hair grows out of your scalp.
Okay.
Because hair grows at a relatively consistent rate, a standard sample of hair provides a permanent, unalterable historical record of drug use stretching back roughly 90 days.
90 days.
You cannot flush it out. You cannot dilute it. It is a biological logbook.
And when Knight-Swift compared the results of their internal hair follicle testing against the federal urinalysis standard, the numbers were shocking. Their data shows that hair follicle testing catches roughly 14 times more heavy drug users than the standard urinalysis.
Let the statistical magnitude of that sink in. 14 times.
Unbelievable.
It means that for every single driver the federal government's testing protocol manages to catch, Knight-Swift's enhanced testing is catching 13 more individuals who are actively using heavy narcotics, who would have easily passed the federal test and have handed the keys to a commercial truck.
That is the statistic I brought up at the very beginning. When you are driving down the highway and next to a massive semi-truck, you are trusting that the system has vetted that driver. But if the official national numbers are missing up to 93% of the actual drug use because they refuse to update their testing methods, that trust is entirely misplaced.
Completely.
But here is the truly maddening part. The regulatory paradox that punishes companies like Knight-Swift for trying to be safe.
Yeah.
Because the Department of Health and Human Services has dragged its feet for years and hasn't written the official rules to officially adopt and mandate hair testing, the federal government literally does not recognize Knight-Swift's hair follicle results.
Which is insane.
They run a national database called the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, which is supposed to track violations so bad drivers can't just hop from company to company.
But the clearinghouse only accepts positive results from the federally mandated urinalysis.
Exactly. So I want to walk through exactly how this plays out in the real world. A guy walks into a night swift recruiting center. He wants to drive. They take a urine sample and they take a hair sample.
Okay.
The urine sample comes back clean because he stopped using cocaine 3 days ago. But the hair sample comes back glowing red, showing consistent, heavy cocaine use over the last 3 months.
Right.
Night Swift obviously immediately rejects the applicant. They refuse to hire him. But by law, they cannot report that positive hair test to the federal clearinghouse.
It's an astonishing loophole. Because the government doesn't recognize the hair test, that applicant's official federal record remains completely spotless.
Spotless.
So that rejected applicant literally walks out of the Night Swift recruiting center, drives down the street to a competitor, perhaps one of those chameleon carriers we discussed.
Oh, wow.
Who only does the bare minimum federal urine test. The applicant passes that urine test, the competitor checks the federal clearinghouse, sees a clean record, and hires him.
So Night Swift spends extra money to be safer, they identify a dangerous hazard, and their reward is that their less scrupulous competitors get to hire the driver they rejected, put him in a truck, and then use their lower operating costs to underbid Night Swift on freight rates.
Yeah.
It is a system that actively subsidizes danger.
It is fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
But this is exactly why the management team is so optimistic right now, because that broken system is finally under legislative assault. During the Q&A portion of the earnings call, the executives specifically brought up something called Leela's Law.
Yes. What is the mechanism behind Leela's Law? How does it actually fix this?
Leela's Law is a piece of proposed federal legislation specifically designed to close this exact loophole. It doesn't necessarily mandate that every mom-and-pop trucking company in America has to instantly start paying for expensive hair testing, but it does codify into law the ability for major carriers who voluntarily pay for hair testing, like Night Swift, to legally report those positive results directly into the National Clearinghouse.
That would be a massive shock to the system.
It would be seismic. If that law passes, or if the administration independently authorizes it, every single one of those heavy drug users that the major carriers catch will be instantly legally disqualified from driving for anyone else.
Just red flagged immediately.
Red flagged in the national database. It will aggressively and permanently pull a massive swath of capacity, the most dangerous capacity, straight out of market.
So if we look at the macro picture, we have the FMCSA physically revoking fake CDLs. We have the crackdown shutting down chameleon carriers. We have insurance companies enforcing $5 million minimums that bankrupt the bad actors. And we have the potential for Leela's Law to red flag thousands of drug users.
A total squeeze.
The bad capacity is being violently squeezed out of the market. So the obvious question becomes, when all of those trucks vanish, who actually steps in to haul the freight? And that brings us to Night Swift's physical fleet and the sheer power of their truckload operation. The data reveals that roughly 70% of Night Swift's massive fleet is deployed in one-way over-the-road service.
And that 70% figure is the golden ticket.
Why is that?
Because the one-way, over-the-road market is the exact segment that was most heavily infiltrated by the chameleon carriers, and therefore it is the exact segment that is experiencing this great regulatory capacity purge.
Ah, I see.
Night Swift's exposure to this specific upcycle is enormous. They have the physical assets, the clean safety records, and the compliant drivers ready and waiting to absorb the millions of loads of freight that the bad actors can no longer legally touch.
But what is truly impressive to me isn't just that they are positioned for the future. It's how incredibly well they managed this massive, expensive, asset-heavy business during the darkest days of the recession. Let's look at the financial performance of that legacy truckload division in Q1.
Okay, let's look at it.
Their truckload adjusted operating ratio degraded by only 70 basis points year over year, landing at 96.3%.
Yeah.
Now, in the trucking industry, operating ratio, or OR, is the ultimate metric of health. It simply measures your operating expenses as a percentage of your revenue.
Exactly.
So an OR of 96.3% means that for every $100 Night Swift makes in revenue, they are spending $96.30 just to keep the lights on, buy fuel, pay drivers, and maintain the trucks. That leaves them with a razor-thin $3.70 in operating profit.
In the logistics world, a lower operating ratio is always the goal. A normalized, incredibly healthy operating ratio for a well-run truckload carrier in a strong economy is usually in the mid-80s.
Mid-80s.
Yeah. The truly elite, highly specialized carriers might briefly touch the high 70s. Operating at 96.3% is survivable, but it is uncomfortably close to the break-even line. If you hit 100%, you are working for free. If you go over 100%, you are paying for the privilege of hauling someone else's freight.
So 96.3% sounds dangerous, but you are saying it's actually a massive achievement.
It absolutely is, because context is everything. You have to remember the environment they were operating in during Q1. Spot market rates were scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel. Shippers were demanding massive rate cuts on contract renewals. And Knight-Swift was actively absorbing millions of dollars in localized weather and tax headwinds.
Right, the snowstorms and the Mexican VAT.
Exactly. In that apocalyptic environment, for their legacy truckload operation to only degrade by 70 basis points, which is less than 1%, is a testament to an almost fanatical level of operational discipline.
So how do they pull that off? How do you prevent your margins from falling off a cliff when the rates you're charging are plummeting?
It's all about efficiency.
The executives noted they were saved by a reduction in empty miles and a strengthening rate environment late in the quarter. But the operational statistic that blew me away was this. Q1 marked their 7th consecutive quarter of year-over-year improvement in miles per tractor.
That is the magic trick of massive logistics networks, and it is incredibly difficult to execute.
How so?
Think about the pure mechanics of asset utilization. Your goal is to keep your truck moving, fully loaded with paying freight, for as many legal hours of the day as possible. When overall market demand is sluggish and there is less freight to go around, keeping a truck constantly moving is a logistical nightmare.
Because if a truck delivers a load in a bad market, there might not be another load waiting nearby for them to pick up.
Exactly. And that leads to deadhead miles.
Dead miles.
Deadheading is when a driver drops off a load and the dispatcher has to send them 50, 100, or 200 miles away to find the next paying load. During those deadhead miles, the truck is entirely empty.
And that costs money.
So much money. You are paying the driver for their time, you are burning expensive diesel fuel, you are putting wear and tear on the tires, and you are generating absolutely zero revenue. Deadhead miles are pure margin killers.
Wow.
For Knight-Swift to improve their miles per tractor for 7 straight quarters, right through the teeth of a recession, means their digital routing algorithms, their human dispatchers, and their customer network density are operating at peak ruthless efficiency. They are squeezing every conceivable drop of productivity out of the assets they have, perfectly chaining loads together so the trucks almost never run empty.
So the legacy Knight-Swift operation, the core brand, is running incredibly lean, safe, and efficient. But we have to address the elephant in the room when it comes to their truckload segment.
Oh, U.S. Express.
We have to talk about U.S. Express. Knight-Swift acquired U.S. Express a few years ago, and the Q1 data highlights a truly aggressive move. Since buying them, Knight-Swift has shed thousands of tractors from the U.S. Express fleet. They literally got rid of a massive portion of the physical trucks they bought.
It's a huge reduction.
I have to push back on management's logic here. If Adam Miller, the CEO, is looking at the horizon and saying the market is about to boom, capacity is leaving, and rates are going to skyrocket, why on earth did they spend the last few years shrinking the U.S. Express fleet by thousands of trucks? Isn't that literally selling your shovels right before the gold rush begins? Aren't they leaving millions of dollars of future capacity on the table?
It seems entirely counterintuitive on the surface. If you know a boom is coming, you want as much equipment ready to deploy as possible. But when you look at the deep structural teardown that Knight-Swift executed on U.S. Express, it becomes a brilliant masterclass in addition by subtraction.
Addition by subtraction. Explain that.
When a giant like Knight-Swift acquires another massive carrier like U.S. Express, they aren't just buying the physical metal of the trucks. They are buying the underlying freight network, the customer relationships, and the driver culture that those trucks operate within.
Right.
And when Knight-Swift opened the books and looked under the hood of U.S. Express, what they found was a fundamentally broken, unsustainable business model.
What was the critical flaw?
The fatal flaw was their freight mix. Prior to the acquisition, an astonishing 40% of U.S. Express loads were coming from brokers.
Why is that a death knell? I mean, a load is a load, right? If pays, you haul it.
That's the mindset of a chameleon carrier, not a sustainable enterprise. If you are a massive, multi-billion-dollar asset-based carrier trying to build A predictable, highly efficient network relying on brokers for 40% of your volume destroys your routing algorithms.
Because it's unpredictable.
Exactly. Broker freight is the spot market. It is highly transactional and incredibly volatile. You have zero long-term relationship with the actual shipper. Furthermore, it has terrible margins because the broker, the middleman who found the freight, is taking a 10, 15, or 20% cut of the revenue before the truck ever touches the dock.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize they took that much.
They do. But the worst part is the unpredictability. You can't efficiently plan your network. You can't minimize those deadhead miles we just talked about because you have absolutely no idea where broker freight is going to send your truck tomorrow.
So they essentially bought a massive house that was built on a crumbling foundation of cheap, unpredictable freight.
Exactly. So Knight-Swift came in and did what had to be done. They ruthlessly fired the bad freight.
Okay.
Cut it completely. They purposefully walked away from that massive chunk of unreliable broker volume. They decided to take the short-term revenue hit to go out and secure direct contractual relationships with actual shippers.
Wow.
But it wasn't just the freight that was broken, it was the culture. Knight-Swift looked at the drivers U.S. Express was employing and realized the safety standards were simply not up to par with the elite legacy Knight-Swift brands.
Yeah.
They were taking on too much risk. So Knight-Swift immediately raised the hiring standards to match their own.
I see the domino effect here. When you fire 40% of your freight because it's cheap broker volume, and you simultaneously raise your driver safety standards so high that you are firing bad drivers and hiring far fewer new ones, you inevitably end up with a massive surplus of physical trucks that have no freight to haul and no driver to sit in the seat.
Precisely. You end up with what the industry calls unseated tractors. And there is nothing more financially toxic to a trucking company than an unseated tractor.
It's just a giant paperweight.
Right. It just sits against a chain link fence in a terminal, slowly rusting, while you continue to pay massive insurance premiums and record the daily depreciation of the asset on your books. Carrying that overhead will destroy your operating ratio.
So instead of picking to maintain a fleet of empty trucks, Knight-Swift aggressively shed the tractors.
Just sold them off.
They shrunk the physical footprint of the fleet down to perfectly match the new, high-quality, high-safety freight base they were meticulously building.
It was a brutal physical therapy, but the results of that pain are definitively starting to show. The report states that the CSA Crash Basic, which is the federal metric tracking a carrier's involvement in accidents, improved by a staggering 60% at U.S. Express since Knight-Swift took over.
60%. That isn't just a marginal improvement. That is a total transformation of the safety culture. It means vastly fewer accidents, lower insurance payouts, and less liability.
It is a complete operational turnaround. Now, to be fair, financially, U.S. Express is still lagging behind. The data notes they are currently trailing the legacy Knight-Swift brands and operating ratio by approximately 300 basis points.
So if the legacy truckload division is operating at a lean 96.3%, U.S. Express is hovering near 99.3%. They are barely keeping their nose above water.
Exactly. But the context is crucial. The structural repairs are finished. The terrible freight is gone. The safety culture has been entirely overhauled. The massive overhead of thousands of unseated tractors has been eliminated. The foundation is now rock solid.
Right.
All they are waiting for now is for the overall market rate environment to rise. And as rates go up, because they now have a lean, highly efficient operation, they are perfectly positioned to rapidly close that 300 basis point gap and finally realize the massive earnings leverage they envisioned when they bought the company.
It's incredible. It's exactly like buying a dilapidated fixer-upper house. They didn't just slap a fresh coat of paint on it to flip it. They stripped it down to the studs, ripped out the bad plumbing, rewired the entire electrical system, and rebuilt the foundation. Now, they're just sitting back, waiting for the neighborhood property values to skyrocket so they can sell it at a massive premium.
That is exactly what they did.
But the physical trucks are only half the story of this supply chain revolution. The digital middlemen, the brokers who facilitate that spot market freight we were just talking about, are also facing a massive existential reckoning. This brings us to the flight to quality happening right now in logistics and LTL.
Yeah, let's talk about the brokers.
Let's look at Knight-Swift's logistics segment, which is their internal brokerage business. Remember, in this segment, they don't use their own trucks. They match shippers with third-party carriers. And the numbers here are incredibly stark. Logistics revenue declined by 9.9% year over year. But more importantly, the actual volume of freight they moved dropped by a massive 18.9%. They moved nearly 20% fewer loads than they did a year ago.
It sounds terrible.
It does. Normally, a 20% drop in volume is a catastrophe. But they didn't lose that volume to competitors. They intentionally destroyed it. They purposefully cut the number of active third-party carriers they tender loads to by a staggering 30% since the beginning of the year.
30% in just a few months.
I want to put this in perspective because it's wild. Imagine if a massive consumer technology platform like Airbnb or Uber looked at their internal data and decided overnight to permanently ban 30% of their hosts or drivers.
People would lose their minds.
That would absolutely decimate their short-term revenue, just like it hit Knight-Swift's logistics volume. But why would a company willingly inflict that kind of financial damage on themselves? To ensure user safety and protect the long-term integrity of the brand. Knight-Swift implemented a severe draconian carrier vetting process in response to a terrifying spike in cargo theft and highly troubling carrier practices across the industry.
That Airbnb analogy is incredibly apt. In the brokerage business, the broker's historical primary motivation has been margin.
Just pure profit.
Exactly. A shipper pays you $2,000 to move a load. Your goal is to find the cheapest possible truck willing to haul it for $1,500 so you can pocket the $500 spread. The cheaper the truck, the bigger your profit.
Right.
But that blind pursuit of cheap capacity has opened the door to highly sophisticated organized crime. The freight industry is currently being plagued by massive cargo theft rings and the phenomenon of ghost trucks.
Ghost trucks. That sounds ominous. Walk me through the actual mechanics of a ghost truck operation. How does someone steal an entire semi-trailer full of goods?
It is essentially sophisticated identity theft, but applied to commercial freight. It relies on the anonymity of digital load boards, which are like massive online classified ads where brokers post freight and carriers bid on it.
Okay, I can picture that.
Here's how the scam works. A bad actor goes online and targets a legitimate mid-sized trucking company that has a good safety rating and a clean DOT number. They steal that company's identity. They create fake email addresses that look incredibly similar to the real company's emails. They forge identical insurance certificates and operating authority documents.
Wow, they go all out.
They do. Then, when a broker posts a high-value load on a digital load board, say $1 million worth of flat-screen televisions or pharmaceuticals, the scammer reaches out posing as the legitimate trucking company. They bid on the load. Because the broker checks the DOT number and sees a clean, safe company, they award the freight to the scammer.
So the broker thinks they just hired a great carrier, but they actually just handed the keys to a criminal.
Exactly. The scammer then hires a separate, completely unaware local truck driver off the internet, pays them a few $100 to go to the shipper's warehouse, pick up the trailer full of televisions, and drop it off at a random, unmonitored warehouse or parking lot nearby.
An innocent middleman.
Yep. Once the trailer is dropped, the scammer's own crew moves in, hooks up the trailer, and vanishes. The cargo is immediately broken down and sold on the black market. The shipper has lost $1 million in product. The legitimate trucking company has no idea their identity was used. And the broker is left holding the bag, their reputation in ruins.
That is a nightmare.
During the earnings call, management specifically highlighted how terrifying it is that in the modern brokerage environment, a broker often has absolutely no idea who's actually sitting in the cab of the truck picking up the freight.
That is a fundamental breakdown of trust. If you are a shipper moving high-value electronics, the idea that a random, unverified person could just drive away with your inventory is unacceptable.
Which is exactly why Knight-Swift decided to step in and stop the bleeding, even if it cost them 20% of their volume. They implemented incredibly rigorous manual vetting standards. They no longer just trust a digital DOT number.
So what do they do instead?
They track exactly how long a carrier has been in business. They demand to see real-time GPS logs of where the tractors physically are. They require copies of the actual driver's CDL to match the face to the name on the paperwork. If a third-party carrier cannot immediately provide that level of transparency, they are permanently cut from the network.
It's gone.
30% of their capacity gone overnight. But it secures a premium level of brand trust for the long haul.
And how are the actual shippers reacting to this? If I'm a massive retailer and I'm reading reports about ghost trucks and cargo theft rings, I have to be terrified of the spot market.
They are terrified, and it is driving a massive flight to quality. Shippers are realizing the hard way that saving $200 on a freight rate by using a shady digital broker is absolutely not worth the risk of losing a $200,000 load to organized theft.
Right. It's penny wise and pound foolish.
Because of this fear, we are seeing a structural shift in how freight is awarded. Shippers are increasingly favoring asset-based relationships. The report specifically notes that major shippers are now actively writing protective clauses into their annual contracts.
What kind of clauses?
They are explicitly demanding to limit the percentage of their freight that can be handled by brokers, or they are mandating that only massive asset-based carriers like Knight-Swift, the companies that actually own the metal, employ the drivers, and have physical terminals, are allowed to touch their high-value freight.
They want absolute chain of custody. They want a single company to take full responsibility from the moment the dock door closes to the moment the seal is broken at the destination. And that plays perfectly into Knight-Swift's hands, because even their logistics brokerage division has the massive physical backing of their asset network behind it.
Exactly.
And we see this exact same flight to quality playing out in their LTL or less than truckload segment. Let's look at those numbers. While the logistics volume shrank, LTL revenue actually grew by 2.6%. But the operational metric that is truly revealing is that their weight per shipment increased by 5.2%.
To understand why a 5.2% increase in weight is a massive win, we have to look at how an LTL network actually functions. It is a game of three-dimensional Tetris.
Tetris, okay. I like that.
In a truckload shipment, you sell the entire trailer to one customer, regardless of whether they fill it with heavy lead pipes or lightweight foam pillows.
Right, it's their trailer for the day.
But in LTL, you are combining freight from dozens of customers into a single trailer. You have two limiting factors: the physical cubic space of the trailer and the legal weight limit of 80,000 pounds.
Volume versus mass.
Exactly. Historically, LTL carriers handled a lot of light, fluffy retail freight. It took up a massive amount of physical space in the trailer, but weighed very little. So a trailer might cube out, meaning it is physically completely full from floor to ceiling, but it only weighs 40,000 pounds. You are leaving tens of thousands of pounds of legal hauling capacity completely unmonetized.
Because you hit the roof before you hit the weight limit.
Exactly.
So an increase in weight per shipment means they are optimizing the math of the trailer.
Yes. Knight-Swift has been strategically transitioning their LTL operations from a fragmented series of regional players into a unified national network. They noted that tonnage grew progressively throughout the quarter. January was up 1.6%, February was up 2.6%, and March jumped to 6.9% year-over-year growth.
That's a solid trend line.
By building a national footprint, they are attracting a different tier of customer. They're moving away from that light retail freight and actively taking on heavier, longer-haul industrial shipments.
Okay, so heavy machinery.
Industrial freight, machinery parts, dense materials, they take up very little physical space but weigh a ton. By mixing that heavy industrial freight with lighter shipments, they can maximize both the cubic space and the weight limit of the trailer, drastically improving the profit margin on every single mile that trailer drives. It's a clear signal that their massive investment in a national LTL powerhouse is rapidly gaining traction.
Okay, so let's summarize the board here because the pieces are rapidly coming together. We have bad, unsafe capacity being systematically purged from the market by government regulation and insurance minimums.
Sure.
We have Knight-Swift's internal truckload operations running at peak lean efficiency. They have successfully stripped down and rebuilt the U.S. Express disaster.
Check.
And we have massive shippers terrified of cargo theft, fleeing the cheap spot market and running towards secure, asset-heavy carriers. When you combine all of those volatile ingredients into a single pot, what ultimately happens to the price of moving goods in America?
It goes up rapidly.
This brings us to the climax of the deep dive. The bidding war and Q2 guidance. And this is where the financial paradox we discussed at the very beginning, the gap loss versus the extreme optimism, finally resolves itself into a clear picture.
It all clicks together here.
The data reveals some highly unusual, almost panicked market behavior happening right now. First, shippers are actively reaching out to Knight-Swift to secure peak season support in April.
When you understand the natural rhythm of the freight cycle, a shipper calling for peak capacity in April is the ultimate canary in the coal mine.
Why is April so weird?
Well, peak season in the logistics world typically refers to the late summer and fall, usually August through October. That is when massive global retailers are importing huge volumes of inventory and moving it across the country to stock distribution centers ahead of Black Friday and the holiday shopping rush.
Okay, so that's months away.
Historically, shippers secure trucks for peak season in June or July. For a sophisticated supply chain manager to pick up the phone in April and beg a carrier to lock in capacity for September is highly irregular.
It shows fear.
It tells you that the people managing billions of dollars of freight are looking at the exact same data we are. They see the chameleon carriers disappearing. They see the trucks leaving the market. And they are panicking. They want to lock in a reliable asset-based carrier now before the market tightens completely and they are left without trucks to move their holiday inventory.
The panic is palpable. And it's manifesting in another phenomenon the CEO mentioned. Turnback bids are happening more frequently. Let's dig into the mechanics of a turnback because it illustrates just how violently the leverage is shifting back to the carriers. What exactly happens during a turnback bid?
To fully grasp a turnback, you have to understand the ritual of bid season. Once a year, usually in the first quarter, massive Fortune 500 shippers send out a request for proposal or an RFP to hundreds of carriers.
Right, it's a giant spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's a massive spreadsheet. They say, hey, I have 1,000 loads going from our factory in Chicago to our distribution center in Dallas over the next 12 months. Give me your absolute best contractual price per mile to haul this. The carriers submit their bids, fighting against each other to offer the lowest price, and the shipper awards the freight.
Okay, that makes sense.
A turnback happens when a carrier wins that freight, signs the contract, but a month or two later, the overall capacity in the market tightens so dramatically that the open spot market rates skyrocket.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Suddenly, that carrier looks at the cheap contract they just signed, looks at the massive money they could be making on the open market, and realizes they are effectively losing money by honoring the contract.
Wow.
So the carrier simply calls the shipper, tears up the contract, and turns the freight back. They reject the award they just won.
It's like signing a year-long lease on an apartment, and 2 months later, the landlord tears up the lease because they realize they could rent it to someone else for twice the price.
That is exactly what it is.
That has to throw a supply chain manager's entire world into total chaos. They have hundreds of pallets of freight sitting on a loading dock, a production schedule to maintain, and suddenly, no trucks showing up to move it.
It is pure chaos. And when a turnback happens, the shipper is forced to issue what's called a mini bid to try to find emergency capacity to rescue that freight.
Yeah.
But because the market is tightening, the cheap trucks are gone.
The chameleons aren't there to save them.
Exactly. The chameleon carriers aren't there. So the shipper ends up having to pay a massive premium rate to whoever has the reliable equipment to bail them out. Knight-Swift explicitly noted that the deeply discounted spot market rates that shippers relied on for 3 years have simply evaporated.
And because of this incredible rapid leverage shift, Knight-Swift announced a massive, aggressive change in their pricing strategy moving forward. Just 1 quarter ago, during the depths of the recession, they were targeting meek, low to mid, single-digit percentage increases on their contract renewal.
Right, just single digits.
Now, management stated they have shifted their target to high single to low double-digit percentage increases on current pricing activity. We are talking 8, 10, maybe 12% rate hikes across the board.
And that is the exact inflection point where the recession officially ends and the upcycle begins. Right. For 3 long years, shippers held all the cards. They had absolute power. They routinely used off-cycle bids, essentially running surprise reverse auctions in the middle of the year to relentlessly crush carrier pricing.
Yeah.
They drove rates down to the absolute floor because there were simply too many desperate trucks willing to haul freight for pennies just to keep moving.
Now the pendulum is violently swinging back. Carriers are turning down cheap freight, shippers are scrambling to guarantee capacity for the holidays, and Knight-Swift is sitting at a negotiating table dictating the terms.
It's their turn to hold the cards.
They are currently going through their massive network, aggressively identifying any contract that is underperforming or sitting below market value, and demanding rate reviews. And if the shipper balks, if they refuse to agree to a double-digit increase, Knight-Swift is now perfectly willing to walk away from that customer entirely and put that highly efficient truck onto the rising spot market.
It's an aggressive move, but a necessary one.
So if I'm a supply chain executive at a massive retailer and I built my entire transportation budget around the artificially low, rock-bottom prices created by chameleon carriers over the last 3 years, how painful is this transition going to be for my bottom line?
It is going to be incredibly painful. Shippers constructed their financial forecasts and supply chain budgets around an artificial reality. They got addicted to the subsidized rates provided by unsafe carriers dodging regulations.
Yeah.
Now that the government is forcing those bad actors out, the shippers are going to be forced to pay the true, sustainable, fully burdened cost of moving freight safely. It is a massive margin shock to the retail sector.
But for Knight-Swift, this leverage translates immediately and directly into their forward-looking financials.
It sure does.
Which brings us perfectly to their Q2 guidance. We started this deep dive looking at an adjusted earnings per share of just 9 cents in the first quarter. But after purging the bad freight, dodging the one-offs, and pushing through double-digit rate increases, they are projecting their second quarter adjusted EPS to land between 45 cents and 49 cents. That is an explosive sequential jump.
It is a profound acceleration in profitability. It proves definitively that the $35 million in weather and legal one-offs from Q1 truly were localized anomalies.
Yes, ghosts in the machine.
Exactly. It shows that the core machine is highly optimized and that the massive new revenue generated by those double-digit rate increases will begin flowing directly and unimpeded to the bottom line by the end of the second quarter.
It truly is a masterclass in seeing through the temporary noise of a quarterly earnings report to understand the structural reality underneath.
Without a doubt.
Let's bring this all together. We started this deep dive looking at what appeared on paper to be a financial disaster, a gap loss, rapidly shrinking operating income, and flat revenue. But peeling back the layers of the logistics industry reveals a completely different, highly strategic narrative.
It's all about looking past the surface.
Knight-Swift utilized a severe 3-year freight recession to ruthlessly clean house. They didn't just weather the storm, they actively used the downtime to perform major surgery on their operations. They slashed bad, broker-reliant capacity at U.S. Express. They implemented hyper-strict safety and tracking standards that voluntarily purged 30% of their brokerage network to protect their customers from ghost trucks.
Right.
And they drove their internal routing efficiencies to record highs, improving their miles per tractor for 7 straight quarters. Now, as the federal government finally steps in with a heavy hand to forcefully remove the unsafe, non-compliant chameleon carriers from the highways, Knight-Swift is standing at the exact right place at the exact right time.
They saw it coming.
They have a massive, highly efficient, incredibly safe fleet ready to dictate double-digit rate increases to shippers who are suddenly desperate for reliable capacity.
It is a textbook example of corporate positioning. They willingly absorbed the pain and suffered through the trough of the cycle, shedding bad assets and bad freight, specifically so they could maximize their leverage and dominate the market when the macroeconomic cycle inevitably peaked.
So after an hour of deep diving into operating ratios, turnback bids, and hair follicle testing, what does this all mean for the person listening to this right now? Why should you, in your daily life, care about the contract negotiations of a massive truckload carrier?
It's the ultimate question.
Well, look around the room you are sitting in right now. The furniture you are sitting on, the electronics you are using, the physical materials that built the walls of your home, the groceries sitting in your refrigerator. Every single piece of it at some point moved on a truck. Often, it moved on multiple trucks across different segments, from intermodal ports to LTL local delivery.
Literally everything.
When the U.S. trucking market tightens to this extreme degree, and massive carriers like Knight-Swift start successfully pushing through double-digit rate increases, those increased transportation costs do not just disappear into the ether. They ripple violently through the entire supply chain. That increased cost of transportation ultimately gets baked into the final price of the goods sitting on the retail shelf.
Yeah, that's exactly how inflation works in the physical world.
This deep dive isn't just a story about a freight company improving its margins. It is a leading indicator for the overall cost of living and inflation in the physical economy.
Transportation is the invisible tax applied to absolutely everything we consume. When the cost of moving the box goes up, the cost of the item inside the box goes up.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought to mull over as we wrap up. We spent a lot of time detailing this massive regulatory purge, the FMCSA crackdowns on diploma mills, the enforcement of $5 million insurance minimums that bankrupt bad actors, the potential for Lilla's Law to introduce national hair follicle drug testing, and red-flagged thousands of dangerous drivers.
All good things for safety.
But if this tightening regulatory net successfully and permanently removed the cheapest, most unsafe chameleon carriers from our highways, does that mean the golden era of ultra-cheap, subsidized shipping is officially over forever?
It's a sobering thought.
Over the last decade, we have all become deeply accustomed to the magic of free 2-day shipping and rock-bottom retail prices. But those prices were heavily subsidized by a shadow network of non-compliant, unsafe trucks running on razor-thin margins and dodging federal oversight.
Right. Somebody was paying the price. It just wasn't us at the register.
If the entire American supply chain system is finally forced to operate safely, legally, and sustainably, is the everyday consumer truly ready to absorb and pay the real, hidden, fully burdened cost of moving goods across the country? Think about the economics of that the next time you see a massive 80,000-pound rig rolling down the highway next to you. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.